quite a while ago, I bought these two bobbin lace doilies, and while I don't like them as decor items, I'm all in for lacy garments. Having them laying around screams old-fashioned to me, but in a garment I really like that vibe. Make that make sense. But anyways, I knew I wanted to make a blouse and somehow fit these doilies into the design. Finally, I settled on the chest and shoulder area and also found an antique sketch of a blouse that would fit those requirements. Equipped with the pattern, I traced it and simulated it in 3D software CLO 3D, and after scaling the pieces and solving the three-dimensional puzzle, I wasn't that sure if it would fit. The basic scaling looked right, but I just couldn't imagine that the back piece would work like that. But since I wanted proof of my suspicion first, I switched to real-life sewing and made the first mock-up. And I was right. I could barely put the blouse on, since the back pieces didn't give any room for my shoulders. So I changed that, what gave me more room, but then the proportions of the shoulder pieces didn't fit anymore. This mock-up version 5, I guess. So I've cut it all out and now I have to re-sew it once again and see if this might be hopefully the last mock-up. Now most of it fits. This time it only took me 6 mock-ups to make it work and not 26 like last time. I learned apparently some things last time. And I had help, I should not forget to mention that. My friend Clara helped me when I was stuck and gave me the tip to take out the extra fullness of the gatherings to see if the overall shape is good. So if you wondered where the volume has gone, this is the reason. And it will be added later in the actual blouse again. I did my last mock-up. These patterns now really fit my body. With a fairly good fitting mock-up, I proceeded with preparing the actual blouse. I used a white cotton wool, which I find fits the delicacy and color of the lace doilies quite well. At this point I got a little stuck since I not only wanted to fit the doilies into the design, but also make my own lace. And I realized that this will take a little longer, and it would not make any sense to wait with the blouse until the lace is finished. I then started sewing the main seams. I made French seams since I wanted all the seams to be neat and avoid any chance that the fabric starts fraying. That's also the reason why I finished every piece with the overlock. Well, actually that's not quite true. I really wanted to check my grandma's machine and see if it still works after 10 years of idleness. And I can proudly confirm that it does, with some hiccups. But I will figure out what causes them another time. I went completely nuts with securing those seam allowance, but secure is secure. Then I created the gatherings with 2 lines of fairly wide stitches along the edges. Following that, I gathered them by pulling in the 2 threads and securing them with the needle. At the shoulder pieces, I had to make sure that the gatherings were really neat and tiny in order to fit to the shoulder pieces. Then I sewed them on first, sewing it on with 1/2 centimeter of seam allowance, and after a good press where I made sure that the shoulder pieces lay really flat and the gatherings are pushed down, I made French seam and turned the seam allowance around and sewed it on the other side. The only point where this was a little bit difficult was where the shoulder pieces are round. So I had really to make sure that the gatherings lay flat on the other side. Once the main seams were finished, I had some concerns. As you can see, somehow those shoulder pieces really go wide over my shoulders. And in the mock-up this was not the case. So now I'm somewhat confused why these are suddenly way too wide outside. I hope the solution is that I have 1.5 centimeter of seam allowance here, so once the collar is set in, once the collar is set in, it will be pulled up a little, and then it, as I tested it, it should pull up again a little bit so that it would fit. But I'm not sure if that's the case. I'm a little bit frightened. But anyways, I just hope that is the solution.
So I sewed on the collar all again with French seam. So first with the normal seam and then turning it around and sewing it once again.
I have some troubles, I don't know why, but also with the last blouse, the cuff ended up to be too small, and in the mock-up it fitted. Maybe I should change a little bit about the... I don't know. I really don't know. I think I will sew it in right now and see if it works or not, and if not, I have to reopen it and recut it, I guess, but it's just too small. It's just... all my arms haven't gotten bigger in the last 2 weeks or so. I don't know. But I will stop complaining right now and do the work.
The cuffs were a little bit difficult to sew in, so I had to really force the fabric beneath the sewing foot. But once the gathering part was done, it was fairly easy again.
By the way, this is the only seam I did not work as a French seam, since all the gatherings made it impossible to do so.
Then I closed the cuffs approximately halfway in order to let the cuff sit snug to the arm and only open as much as is needed to get my hand through.
Okay, the sleeves are way better than I thought before. I think that the pins which were in when I tested it first made it a little bit more bulky so that it felt way too tight, but now it's quite right. It's a tight sleeve, but I think it's okay like this. But I think I will change one thing, and that's the collar. I feel like it's a little bit too high and makes my face look like it's set on a, I don't know, like my head is cut off. So I think I will shorten the collar a little bit, like 2 centimeters or so, that there's a little bit of neck and it doesn't look as placed on it. So that's what I'm going to do, I think, now. And for the rest, I'm quite happy. I have to close the back, but no, it's open. And make the folds in the front. And of course, I forgot to set in the lace here, so that's what I'm going to do once I have shortened the collar too. Let's do it.
So I picked the seam open and tacked the lace to its place.
Since I wanted the raw edge to be hidden in a seam allowance, this also prevents the lace from unraveling.
And in case you're wondering why I haven't shown you the lace yet, well, it's not finished. So that's why I decided to put it in another video. And yes, you see the lace in the front, that one is finished, but
my first plan was just to make the one band for the front. But when I was fitting the blouse, I found the sleeves way too voluminous. And this was another moment my dear friend Clara helped me. She came up with the idea to tie the sleeves in a little, so that I don't lose volume, but still create a more flattering silhouette at the arms. And this I will do with some lace bands. And those are not finished yet. But let's go back to the blouse, since it isn't finished yet either.
I proceeded sewing on the lace with the machine, which might not have been the smartest idea because I had to turn around the fabric under the foot every couple of centimeters in order to follow the scalloped line of the lace so that you won't see the seam that much. Maybe it would have been easier doing it by hand. But anyways, that's how I proceeded stitch by stitch. And once the lace was sewn in, I had to add a waistband, which was indicated in the pattern as being 2 centimeters wide. Once I had pinned it on and made a quick fitting check to know if the waistband was long enough, I was extremely disappointed. I just felt so unflattering with that big pigeon breast. I know that this is the shape of Edwardian blouses, but I so deeply disapprove of it looking in the mirror. That's why I decided to cut off a bunch of fabric at the bottom. I pinned it where I wanted the waistband to actually sit and then checked if I now like the new fit. And actually I did. It still has kind of this pigeon breast, but not that pronounced anymore. I'm still really scared to cut off the lace, but I think I just have to. I marked the new placement of the waistband, then ripped off the gathering, and once it was placed absolutely flat and symmetrical, then I pinned and marked where I have to cut. And then did the most painful thing and cut through the precious lace. I don't even want to think about how many hours of work I cut off at that moment. I quickly resewed the gatherings, and you can really see how the gathering already starts behind the sewing foot. Once that all was back in place, I sewed on the waistband, one side by machine, and the inner side I sewed on by hand with a felling stitch so that it won't be visible at the front. And once it was all sewn, I felt better with the decision. Still, I couldn't really see if it has improved the shape yet, since I could not close the blouse without any buttons. The buttons created a quest for themselves. I actually bought 2 types of buttons, the first one online and some more in the store, and both just looked way too yellow in comparison to the fabric. So I decided to add another step and cover some transparent buttons with fabric. And as you can see, even those transparent buttons have a yellowish tint, which is actually still visible with the fabric over it under some lights. But I decided to ignore that. The covering for the buttons is the same fabric as the main fabric, and I cut out some circles and pulled the fabric in. And I really had to pull as tight as I could, and it was so difficult to push the needles through it after a while, but I didn't want any wrinkles on the front, so I had to put a lot of tension into it. But luckily with the thimble I managed to do that. I marked where each button has to sit and then sewed them on, using the material on the back. Once the button went sewn on, I also added some crocheted loops to the cuffs because I don't want any buttonholes down there. I had some struggles since the thread was quite short, but once it was sewn on, it looks like this. The
buttonholes I sewed with my modern machine, since I'm still not feeling ready to make some by hand. And at this point I was glad to not add even more time to finishing this blouse, since I really badly wanted to see if it was worth all the work.
And after the scary step of cutting this buttonholes open, I was not yet ready to fit it on. I first had to sew on the hooks and eyes for the collar, which I still do not like to do, but maybe someday I'm able to make them stay where they should.
It is all sewn, all finished, all the last finishing touches like cutting off those loose threads or making the buttonholes. All that is finished. I just have to add the lace in order to make it a lace blouse. And therefore I have still to go 2 repeats of the pattern for one of the lace strips. And once that is done, I finally can finish the blouse.
Nonetheless, I can put on the blouse now.
And I'm so happy I made this last alteration at the front. Even cutting through the lace now feels like the right choice. And next time I will show you how I learned to make exactly that lace, and of course how this blouse becomes a lacy one.